Hi guys, welcome to our latest podcast of YarninBlak. Tonight I've got a great friend of mine on, Sherry Balcombe. I'll introduce you to her in a second, but before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm currently calling you from. I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people in Baldwin Q, and I want to pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging. I want to acknowledge any other Aboriginal people that are joining us today, and I want to pay my respect to the beautiful Auntie Sherry that we've got on right now. Sherry, how are you?
I'm really good. Coming to you from Far North Queensland, and so I'm up on my grandparents' country. I'm an Olkola, Djanguy woman, but I was born in Naarm, so I've come up here to visit a bit. So I'm up here visiting family at the moment. I'd like to pay my deepest respects to my ancestors and the land that I'm on up here too. Thank you.
And thanks for joining us. I know it's been hard for us to connect, and I know that I've got one, so I'm so happy to have you. I've got some questions for you. That's why you're on my podcast. And the first one is, where did you grow up? I know you grew up in Naarm. Tell us a little bit about your family and how you sort of kind of grew up a little bit.
Yeah, well, I grew up with a single mum. My mum's not Aboriginal, my dad is, but I was very close to my dad. They separated when I was very small. I think I was about seven when they finally separated. But I always maintained a close relationship with my dad, and I was the light of his life and the apple of his eye. And so I grew up in the western suburbs and went to Maribyrnong High School, and was the only Aboriginal student there. And it was right near the immigration centre, so we used to get an influx of, I think there was something like about 80 different nationalities there, and there was one Aborigine, and that was me. So I really sort of grew up isolated a lot from my community, but was always identified, and as a result, faced a lot of racism because of that. And I actually went when I was, I think I was about 17, and my dad, we had regular contact. We spent a lot of time together, and he told me about the Aboriginal Welfare Officers course that was happening at Preston TAFE, and so I was working at Ansett at the time. And it was terrible. I hated it. And I remember the ladies there saying, oh, you'll never get the sack from here. Little do they know Ansett went out of business, so they did get the sack. But I went on and I did the Aboriginal Welfare Officers course, and it was the best thing I ever did. Changed my life. It gave me a whole direction.
Now, going back to school for a second at Maribyrnong, how much Aboriginal studies were taught at school while you were at school?
There were none. We were taught that Aboriginal people stood on one leg with a spear, and they did this thing called walkabout, and sort of nobody, it was off. We didn't do anything on Aboriginal people at all. Yeah.
By the time I know you've got two kids. Four kids, sorry. 4 kids. Have you seen them learn more about Aboriginal issues in the schools that they have been going to?
Well, because of the way that I grew up, I really, my children from the beginning were, and everybody knew they were Aboriginal. And they grew up really proud. Actually, I remember my daughter, who's 35 now, and she was in kinder, and I was doing the parent kinder duty, and I've sort of wandered off to go and do something in the kitchen, and I came back and they were reading a book, and there was a little girl there with an Aboriginal flag on her T-shirt, and she goes, I said, oh, what's that on there? And Rachel said to me, yes, Mum, we know, it's an Aboriginal flag. So my children really grew up, I think, a lot different than me. They grew up with understanding about their culture, about Aboriginal people, about who they are, and where they come from. And we had some really interesting times. In the first school that they went to St. Margaret's, and my Rachel had been there from grade 5 to grade 6. And then when she'd finished grade 6, we moved out to Point Cook. And and that was very interesting because the next son, Grant, he's very fair, and he had blonde hair, snowy hair, and really fair. And when he started out at Point Cook, I remember he came home one day and he was crying and he said, "Mum, they don't believe I'm Aboriginal." So I that week I was actually looking in the local paper, and my dad was born in Yarrabah here in Cairns, and the Yarrabah mob were down in our local area, and they were doing workshops in schools. And so I rang up the council, and I said, "Look, my dad's from Yarrabah," and he was close to 70 then, and I said, "Look, he's not going back to Yarrabah, but he'd love to catch up with the mob while they're down here." And they said, "Oh, look, we'll send them out to the school and they can come and do an exhibition and all that at the school." So fantastic. And so I remember we had Dad there, and all the kids were lined up ready to go into the hall and, go and watch this dance group. But actually what they did is they came and got my kids first and took them out the back, and my dad was there, and they painted them all up and they put the headdresses on them, and we had the shields, and we did a big photo session. But they came and they pulled them out the line. "Where's these Maloney boys? Come out here." And so we did that. And then when we went into the hall, before they started, they said, "We'd like to acknowledge our Uncle Monty there," and he said, "And all the Maloney boys, stand up." And my boys stood up, and they were 10 foot tall. They were just, it was the best thing that could have happened. And so then after that, there was never ever a question about it. But I remember Grant went to high school, and one of the kids, the kids were saying, "Oh, you're not Aboriginal." And the other kids were saying, "Oh, yeah, he's Aboriginal. We know he's Aboriginal." So it was really good. And I think with my grandkids too, I've really brought them up with that understanding. And my grandson, who's 9 now, when he was at kinder, they had come in your national costume. And so I dressed him up. He had a lap, and he's got the Aboriginal band on, and he had the ochre on, and, the walk, they had the clap sticks and the didgeridoo. And, so they've really grown up with that pride. And Ashton's father too, he's a Wurundjeri man. So, they've really had that understanding of who they are. And it was funny, actually, the boys last week had somebody come there and do a talk on Aboriginal people and that. And when I got there, the 2 grandsons, one's in grade 1 and one's in grade 3, and they said, "Oh, Nan, we need you to come there and teach them." "We do. You've got to come and teach them." Because I did a couple of workshops at the other school when they were in Point Cook. And I remember Ashton was in grade 2, but I was doing the grade 4s. But I said, "I want Ashton to come in. I want him to be here and experience this." And he was just so proud. And I remember at the end of it, I put up the picture of Ashton in the lap and all painted up and everything. And he's standing up the front there, and he's got the clap sticks, and he's playing the clap sticks while I'm talking. And so, and I think that's what it's about, giving them pride in where they come from and who they are. So for me, I think that's the most important thing.
Now, for a number of years, I think it's been about 23 or 24 years, you've been involved with the Aboriginal Catholic Ministry of Victoria.
Yep.
How did you get involved in that?
Well, when we moved to Point Cook, I was looking for tutoring for my kids, and somebody told me about the Opening the Doors Foundation. And the Aboriginal, it grew out of the Aboriginal Catholic Ministry, and it's the only foundation in Australia that supports Indigenous kids from prep to year 12 in independent education. And so they help with books and uniforms. And so I rang up and they said, "Yeah, you're eligible," and which was great because we had very little. We just changed schools. You know, so they've gone from the green and gold uniform to the white and blue uniform. My daughter had started high school, and so I put in the application, and they fitted my daughter out with everything, summer, winter, school bag, everything, and gave me a cheque for $900. So $300 for each of the boys to go down to the uniform shop and fit them out. And I was so touched because, you know, everybody said we get all this free stuff. We get nothing. And, you know, to have this support of going down to the uniform shop and fitting them out, I rang up and I was crying because I was so touched because we've never had any support with anything. And I, you know, and I said, oh, thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to us. It really does make a big difference to our lives and our family being able to be supported like this. And Vicky Clark, who was the coordinator, and I'd actually gone, I didn't know Vicky, but I knew her auntie was my maid of honour when I got married. I went to college with her auntie and her uncle. I worked at Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Agency with her aunties and her cousins, and so I kind of knew half of the family, but I didn't know Vicky. And Vicky said to me, do you want a job? And I said, I can't work. You know, Cameron and James, the twins, the youngest ones, they were in grade 1, and they were 7-year-old, and they were naughty little boys too. So, you know, I said, oh, no, I can't work. And then I said, you know, I've got to get my kids to school. And so Vicky said to me, well, you can start at 10 o'clock. And I said, but what about school holidays? And she said, you can have school holidays off. So I thought, oh, well, you know, all these reasons not to work. And it was only 2 days a week. And so I started off at that. And
so where was that at? Where the office was?
In Thornbury. So it was
near Hungry Jack's?
No, near the Advancement League.
Near the Advancement League, yes.
Yeah, just a block back towards the city from the Advancement League. But it was incredible because I was there for a couple of weeks. Then Vicky said, we've got our national conference on. We're all going over to Adelaide. We'd love you to come. And then you'll get an understanding of what we do here and what we're all about. So, okay then. So I've trotted off over to Adelaide for a week. And I was there, and it was absolutely, I wasn't a Catholic at that stage. My children were Catholic. They'd been baptised, done their sacraments, they'd, you know, in Catholic schools. And while I was there was some women from the Bathurst Islands, and they were doing healings. And they said, come on, we want to do a healing on you. And I kind of, And so I sat down, and they were putting their hands around me. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is really strange. I've never experienced anything like this before. And they said, ask a question. And I was thinking to myself, I don't know what to ask. What am I going to ask? And then I thought, I know. Am I meant to be here? This is so strange. Yeah. I've never experienced anything like this. Am I meant to be here? Well, not that night, but the next night, I need to go back a bit. We were staying at Ross Trevor boarding school, and there's 360 rooms there. And the 2 nights after that, I was in my room and it was late, and I had long hair, and I went to throw it over to tie it up, and underneath the desk, because in those boarding schools, all they got is 2 wardrobes, a desk and a bed. Underneath the desk in big black letters was my maiden name. I couldn't believe it. I thought, wow, there's 360 rooms. Nobody there knew me by my maiden name, but here's my maiden name, and I'm at big black letters, and I went, wow. And, you know, when you're on conference, because it was late, I didn't show anybody. Next morning, got up and, you know, and we were running from 7 o'clock, and I forgot to tell anybody or show anybody. And I remember somebody saying, no, that was just for you. That's why you didn't show anybody. And I got home and I said to Dad, you'll never believe it. You know, and I said, but our name's Maloney. And I said, but it was spelt M-A instead of M-O. He said, I spelled it M-A until I got my birth certificate. Everyone at home spells it M-A. And so I thought, wow, you know, I asked for a sign. Here's the sign.
Yes,
and
that was the sign.
So, yeah. Well, and so I was employed there for 20 years. Once, sort of as the kids got older, I increased the days and got more involved. And had a fantastic mentor, and the people in the ministry. We had quite a few nuns working in there then. Was such a support, and it was really like a family. And I still have a lot of love for the ministry now, a lot of love for it. But it's sadly, I think it's going to close.
Oh.
Yes, they haven't replaced me. I left in 2023, and they haven't replaced me. So I'm very, and I did give them 3 years' notice.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So one, they never believed you were going to leave, but has anyone come close to replacing you?
Well, I found a wonderful young woman who was so passionate. She just started on her journey, and was the eldest of 8. And she was Vietnamese and Aboriginal. And she was just finishing up her master's in teaching, and she was a new Catholic, so she was still shiny and was passionate about the church and that. So I thought, oh, she's a great, this girl, she can grow into this position and she'll be wonderful. But she was also a single mother, and so she said to them, they only put her on 3 days a week. And she said, I'm a single mum. I need to have 5 days a week. I'm not asking for a pay rise, but I need to work 5 days a week so that we can survive. And they wouldn't do it. They said, no, we don't think you've got enough experience, which when I started, I didn't have any experience. But, what they should have done was employed her. I actually interviewed her in the November before I left. And if they had have employed her and let her walk beside me for a few weeks even, it would have made all the difference to her. And they refused to put her on. And she couldn't survive because she's a single mum. And she got offered a job, 50,000 more, teaching at an exclusive Catholic school. And she said to me, what should I do, Sherry? And I said, you need to look after yourself, sweetheart. Because they're not going to look after you. You've got to look after yourself. So since then, they haven't found anybody because they're not paying enough. They haven't got pay parity. They haven't got succession plans. Which is really disappointing because our ministry, we have we so much kudos in the community. We were welcomed by the community and embraced by the community because we did so much with our opening the doors. We did a lot for funerals. We used to do a lot of funerals. We used to do a service at ACES, the Aboriginal Nursing Home, every week. We'd do a lot of cross-cultural education. We started up a program called Fire Carriers where we've got over 200 schools now that are involved. So, but, when there's not that support from the church, then it makes it really difficult to continue. So I'm very disappointed in that.
Yeah, that's a shame, isn't it?
It is, because we put so much work, and there's been, even now, like we've got a non-Aboriginal support group there, our BNAP partners, and they're still going. They're plugging on and they're continuing to go. And I pray that they find somebody because the Aboriginal Catholic Ministry is, we were one of the most powerful ones in Australia. We were out there doing things where the ministry, you walk in there, we've got inlaid lino, we've got artwork everywhere, we've got outdoor artwork, our survival journey, which is really hard-hitting stuff, which talks about colonisation, genocide, but then also, I say out the front are the hard stories about the loss of land, the loss, the genocide with our people. But out the back is the story of hope, of us rising and pulling ourselves up, of us coming back to culture. And then, our dreams for the future. which was, you know, having a voice in this country. So, you know, the ACM's got so much to offer, and it's really disappointing to see that it's going down that path where I don't think that they'll get anybody to replace it, because the work that you've got to do, you know, they want a business manager, they want somebody that can handle a team, they want somebody that knows all about Catholicism, and somebody that's an expert on Aboriginal spirituality. And, you know, they're paying $90,000 a year. You know, Aboriginal people aren't working for free anymore. We know our worth. We want pay parity. You know, we want to be paid what other people would be paid. And when you're in positions like that where you've got a lot of responsibility, and you dedicate, you know, like my job wasn't 9 to 5. I was, I would be working nights, I'd be working weekends, even like leading up to the referendum.
I wasn't determined PM or AM.
Exactly. Oh, you know, we did so much work that was outside of time, which was just part of it. And, you know, I think it's, they've got to have reasonable expectations, and they've got to pay what they would be paying their own executives. You know, what are they paying their executives? Then why shouldn't we be getting paid the same rates that ones that are, you know, running their big organisations and stuff? So that's very disappointing.
Now, you sound like the community development person, because I believe that you did your Bachelor of Applied Science in Community Development, if I'm not correct.
Yep.
I can hear the community development coming through there. When you were doing that course, did the university really understand community development in terms of working with Aboriginal communities, or was it very mainstream community?
No, well, I actually did an Aboriginal one.
Oh, wow, cool.
With RMIT. And so that was brilliant, because we had, I think there was about 15 of us Aboriginal people from around the state. And so that was great. We really were able to bring in our Aboriginality was allowed to come in with us and be there. So that was really, really good.
Do you think they should be running that course again, or another version of that course again?
Yep. And even the welfare course that I did was, you know, out of all the people that, I think, like when we started, there was about 30 that started, and there was about 10 that finished. But like out of the 30, the 15, there'd be at least 15 that have gone on to do massive things. Start up health services, start up rehab centres, ones that run into family violence. You know, everybody that did that course went on to do major things within our community. And so I think it is about educating our mob so we can do it for ourselves. And, you know, I know it's not easy, but, and especially with that, I know when we started, there was some there that, you know, there was one lady there that had a grade 3 education. So it was about, you know, getting them up to standard and stuff like that. But the passion and also what we bring as a community, the community knowledge that we have is invaluable.
Yeah. Now, words that get thrown around a lot lately are things like reconciliation. What does reconciliation mean to you?
Well, we don't have anything to reconcile. It's not us that need to reconcile. It's the wider community. But I think for me, it's about educating people. You know, it's about educating the wider community on Aboriginal people, on our issues, on where we're coming from. I'm freelancing and I do cross-cultural education with principals and teachers mainly. And, you know, and that's when I have an all-day workshop, I'll start off with, you know, before colonisation, this is who we were. This was what our community was. This is how we were governed. You know, we had our laws. We had our communities. Everybody knew their place within that community, and I think that's really important for the wider community to understand that, you know, we weren't cave people that were just wandering around and, you know, off on walkabout somewhere. You know, everything was very structured. It was, you know, there was, everybody had a place. Everybody had understanding of where.
There was punishments if we didn't follow those rules.
Oh, there certainly were. And those rules were taught from babies. You know, we even had dances to show you, you know, if you muck up, this is what's going to happen. You'll get stabbed in the leg. But we also had assassins within our community because we didn't have police, we didn't have jails, you know. And if you did something that was just so couldn't be reconciled, then the assassin, you know, the Featherfoot, the Kadachi man would be sent in to take care of business. So, and everybody knew that. So if you muck up, you know, if you do it really big, you've got this fella coming. And back in, you know, like back in traditional times too, you know, if somebody did something wrong, it'd be shame on them to ask for leniency. You knew what the rule was. You knew what the law, if you break the law, don't ask for compassion because you knew what it was. And that's an incredible way to live. You know, these are the rules, and if you break the rules, that's the consequences. You've got to cop it sweet. And I think it's a really good way to be. And it kept peace and harmony because everybody knew their place.
Yeah, and it lasted for 65,000 years.
That's right. And you know, and we did live in peace and harmony. Everybody knew where their country started, where their country ended. They knew where they could go, what they could do, who you could marry, who you couldn't marry, you know, and even just the respect and the oneness with nature, you know, never killing any more than you needed. You know, when an animal was killed, it'd be killed in a ritualistic manner so that it was respected. Every part of that animal would be used. If it had feathers, the feathers would be used for ceremony. It had fur, the furs would be used for clothing. The sinew would be used for sewing. Every part of that animal would be respected. It'd be eaten. And then when they'd finished, they'd bury the bones back into Mother Earth so the Creator would send another one to replace it. Yeah. And there was also very much, and there is today, I know I've heard my nephews here get in trouble because, my God, they've killed a crab and it was a girl. You know, you've killed a Jill. How can you do that? You know, there's another generation of crabs in there that you've destroyed. And so that's still very, very strong today.
Yeah. Another word that gets thrown around a lot is cultural safety. I want to ask you, what makes you feel culturally safe when you go to a service for the first time?
Well, look, it's good to go in and see signs and symbols. We want to see our flag. We want to see acknowledgements to country. We want to be respected. And yeah, I want to tell you a story about a time I remember taking one of my sons to a job centre, and he isn't very confident. He stumbles on his words, particularly when you're in a place of authority. And and we went there, and and he said, "Oh, can you talk for me, Mum?" And I said, "Yeah." Like, he'd ring Centrelink, and I'd have to be in the background coaching him of what to say, because otherwise he'd just go mum. And
they wouldn't talk to you. They'd have to talk to them. They'd have to talk to them, not you.
That's right. And I said to him, "Look, he can't verbalise what he needs to say." And they said, "No, he's over 18 and he needs to speak." And I said, "But you've got signs up here saying you're culturally sensitive. You are not being culturally sensitive." And we ended up leaving there, and I rang up and made a complaint. And so I had
Yep.
the big manager ring back, and I said, no use having signs up unless you are culturally sensitive. And culturally sensitive is listening to an elder that goes in there as a support person for a child. Well, even he was over 18, but he still wasn't confident. And then they let me go back, and I was able to go in there and help Grant to verbalise what he needed to get across to them. But, so cultural safety isn't just having a flag up and having a sign up, an acknowledgement to country. It's a lot more. And I think that's a really important thing. I'm working for JIRA at the moment, which is the Peak Aboriginal Women's Family Violence organisation in Victoria. And I'm on the cross-cultural team with them. And we do 4-hour sessions. And they're brilliant because it's teaching about what cultural safety really is. It's not words, it's about understanding where people come from, the journey that they've been on, and even how they communicate with you. I've seen people and they're just intimidated. They're intimidated, particularly in legal situations. They're scared to talk. And so with us, with JIRA, we've been working with the legal system, it's working with lawyers and all that kind of stuff, and with the community legal services. And that's what we're teaching them. Communication isn't just the words that come out of people's mouths. It's the contact, it's the eye contact, it's the body language. It's actually connecting and understanding what people are saying and not just taking it off of face value. They can't speak properly, so they don't understand. Well, they do understand, but you might not be saying it. Actually, there's a really good quote that one of them says, and she says, you can hear what I'm saying, but you're not understanding what I'm saying. And I think that's a really good one.
That is a good one. Yeah, because people don't know what they don't know, but they've got to be willing to listen and learn. And I think that there's a lot of people that might say they're an ally, but then don't want to do anything with it. And then there's people that say they're an ally that are willing to have a go and try things. And they're the real allies, not the people that just say they do nothing, but the ones that actually get out and do something. And
are willing to put themselves in an uncomfortable position to sit there and listen. And I think that's a big thing. You wouldn't know how many people I've met and they say, oh, yeah, I'm not racist, but they don't do anything, or, they're lazy, or, and you're not. Well, you are racist, but you're not recognising it, and I've found that even I've got family members. I've got one of my cousins that I grew up with. She said, "Oh, well, why should we have to do an acknowledgement before we start? We work with disabled people." And I said, "Well, wouldn't you do it just for me, just to respect me?" But no, can't see past that. I'm not racist. I believe what doesn't matter what colour you are, but well, I'm sorry, I think you are.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
That not acknowledging that we need to be recognised as being different, and that there are unique needs in there, is where the racist thing is. Yeah. And people don't know, people can't see that.
That's right.
Because I treat all my clients the same. I treat all students the same. Thus, there is colour. It's like a colour blindness kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's disappointing because I think you don't realise that you're racist. You don't realise, and often those people you can't say anything to them because it just goes over their head, and they just don't get it because it is an ingrained thing that's in people's psyche, that they're taught from forever. You know, our schools never teach anything, and I think they don't recognise it, and because they don't, you know, they won't even extend themselves. And I really think this referendum that we've just had was a prime example. You know, Dutton saying, "Oh, if you don't know, don't know." Come on, how stupid are people? If you don't know, vote no. When would you ever say that? If you don't know, you find out. I know when we had the referendum, Cameron and I actually went and did a whole day at the polls, and Cameron looked around and he found the most marginal one that, you know, here, we'll go to this one. And I remember standing there and, you know, there's 60 people in a line and I'm saying, any questions? Ask me a question. I'm up. I'll answer anything you want to know. But the people had just put their heads down. And we had this fella that was there and he was handing out no vote ones. I felt sorry for him. By the time he left, he was apologising to me and he shook my hand and, you know, was saying all the best, and I could see him walking away. He was because he didn't know, you know, he said to me things like, "Oh, I reckon Aboriginal people, you know, men have got it really good. Oh, they get sick of them and they just go on walkabout." I said to him, "Hang on, walkabout isn't just about wandering off and disappearing." I said it's a cultural thing and it's a spiritual thing, you know. And once I explained that to him, and so I had about 6 hours of working on this poor fella. When he was there, I actually felt sorry for him because I thought he doesn't know who he's up against here. But he left with a changed mind, and that's what it's about.
Did he get the Sherry cultural awareness training before or after he voted?
I'm not sure. I think he must have voted before, because I'll tell you, he walked away and you could just see his whole spirit, you know, like, because he got there and he was like, "No, it's no, no, no." And by the time he left, he was so apologetic, and, you know, he'd seen it through different eyes, which is what cross-cultural education is about. It's about helping people to see things through different eyes, to hear with different ears, and to feel with a different heart, to have compassion and understand where we've come from. You know, we have the stolen generation. We have slavery. All of my ancestors, my father, my grandparents, my aunties, uncles, were used as slaves. You know, and Queensland's the only state in this country that's actually recognised stolen wages. No other state in this country has. You know, like even as far as one of my nephews was advertised in the Cairns Post for sale. He's 5 years younger than me, and he was sold. He was sold and lived. He grew up with a beautiful family that he loved dearly, and I'm not disrespecting them, but he ended up coming back and finding his family and found out that he was the eldest of 8. And, you know, the first time he's come home and he's met his parents, both his parents, because I think his mum was 15 when she had him, you know, and all of a sudden he finds out that he's the eldest of 8 children. And they still talk about today, you know. He was there and then the mum said, "Come on, we've all got to go in and eat." And they went inside and he said, "Oh, where do I sit?" And all of his brothers and sisters just started crying, because they used to have one chair at the table that was always there for him and no one was allowed to sit there. And everybody just pointed to the chair. "That's your chair. It's been here all our lives waiting for you." You know, and he's back with his family, but the damage can never, ever be repaired. And he said to me, "I find it difficult because I am the eldest and I have times I've got to roust on my younger ones, but, you know," he says, I often feel like I'm not really part of the family because he didn't grow up with them, you know, and that's real damage that does, and it does intergenerational damage that a lot of people don't understand. And we're talking about 55 years ago, you know, we're not talking about 100 years ago. And I think that's one of the big things that people don't understand, is that when we're talking about stolen wages, about the stolen generation, stolen land, it's not 150, 200 years ago, or like the Indians, Native Americans. It's not like them 400 years ago. Ours is this century, or not this. It's
the elders
recent
in our
history.
community now. It's the elders in our. It's the elders in our community now that are still here. It's my generation as well that has been affected through that. And until people hear those stories, you're exactly right. They believe it was hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
It's not hundreds of years ago. This is stuff that's affected the Aboriginal people that are alive today. And our stories of, as you said, about the transgenerational trauma, it's being told by people that lived it. It's not being told by, we do get the stories handed down to us, but there is a whole generation of stories being told by people that lived through this stuff right now.
Well, I'm up here visiting my auntie, and she's sadly we're probably facing the end of life very soon, because she is very elderly. She's 88, but she was taken away at 12, and she's she's now, because she is at that end of life, she's reliving that now, about being taken away, and she was forced to work and she wasn't paid. She's talking about she wasn't allowed to eat with them. She had to eat outside, and that does damage to people inside. And as a result, she's got, her relationship with her children has been very broken and fractured. Her whole life it's affected all aspects of her life. And it's still affecting her children now. That's the holistic thing that we need to look at. But the thing is, we get this whole thing about that was I like the best one is, I didn't take the children away, and it's not my fault. I didn't steal the land. No, but you're benefiting from it, and you're complacent about it.
And you're working
why can't we reconcile?
Yeah, and you're working in professions sometimes that historically and currently are still involved in many of those gaps that still exist for Aboriginal people, in housing, in child protection, in juvenile justice, in child protection, in family violence, in early childhood, in early birth rates, nurses, doctors, social workers, teachers.
Yes.
All those professions are still there.
Well, we've got more children in out-of-home care now than we did in 1997 when they did the Bringing Them Home report. There's something vastly wrong. I put a submission into the Yuruk, because the Yuruk, the truth-telling, wasn't just about historical. It was about modern day. And I put in reports about Parkville. Here's our kids out here that are they're abandoned. They're damaged. By the time they get to Parkville, they're already damaged. Where's where are these organisations that are meant to be supporting families? What are they doing? And one of my big criticisms was, well, Parkville's only a couple of suburbs away from Vaca. Vaca's our peak body. Yeah. What's Vaca doing? What are they doing? Yeah. They're not doing their job. And I found that personally. We had with my grandson, there was reports made about him, but Vaca didn't contact us as the Aboriginal family and tell us that this was happening. We only found out by default. And I was really angry. And the only reason that anything was done is because I'm educated. And I wrote letters to the ministers, to Vaca, to the child protection, to the courts. I wrote letters complaining about our treatment. And that was the only thing that, that really made a difference. So, but what makes me sad is so people that don't have the education and the knowledge that I have, they're just lost in the system. In the system, and there's no support for them, and it's wrong. It's really wrong. Yeah. And even, with our kids, I was saying, well, we were having kids in there that had been in there for, a couple of years. They're sent home. to dysfunctional families without support, and you're expecting something different to happen. You're not going and working with the families before this kid comes home, putting in support, getting the kid into a job or into training. There's none of that. They just push them out the gate and expect something different to happen. Well, all that happens is they graduate and they go to the men's jail or they go to the women's jail. And I have seen it firsthand. And it absolutely breaks my heart, and I get so angry. And that's why I reported to the Uruk Commission, because I thought, I don't care. What are you going to do? I'm going to be truthful, because this is what it's about. It's about telling home truths. What are our organisations doing? And one of the things even I was saying even about our co-ops, they're getting a lot of money. Why aren't our co-ops in the country areas providing programs for these kids, having things for them to do, instead of just going back to the community where they've been involved in drugs, or going back to the family that hasn't been functional? One of my big things was, why don't, as soon as a child is recognised by the welfare or the police, then our organisation should be going into the family and saying, how can we help you? How can we support you? And I did that with one of my children who was having trouble. And I remember I went into one of the Aboriginal organisations and I said, I need help with this child. I can see it coming like a train wreck. This kid needs support. I sat there for 2 hours and explained what was going on and asked for support. Not one follow-up. And it hit like a train. Exactly what I said was going to happen happened. And there was no support. So you can't blame everybody else too. We need to look at our own communities and what we're doing or what we're not doing. So, I'm not blaming other organisations either. We need to look in our own backyards and see what's working and what's not. And if it's not, why not? What can we do to remedy that and fix it?
Yeah. Now, I'm watching the time. I've got 2 final questions for you. And the first one is, I've got a big pile of, I don't have it really, but if I had a big pile of money here, like $1 zillion and a magic wand, and said to you, fix something in Aboriginal issues, where would you start?
First thing I'd do is I'd have a place where we can take kids out bush. Mate, let's take them miles. You can run. There's nowhere to run. Let's get them back on country. Let's get them back to nature. Let's get them back to culture. Let's get them back to law. Start doing that with them. And I actually just seen a thing on Facebook tonight where there was some kids there. The magic wand. And there was this old man, and he's saying to these kids, what have you done? And the kids had to confess up to what they did. And, and they were ashamed. Good. Make them shame. Make them shame. Make them face up to what they've done. And then he took them out bush, and they were camping out in the, camping out under the stars. And, and I think that's one of the best things that we could do is try to bring back their pride and dignity from their community, because that was one of the big things that we had, was the pride and dignity in ourselves. Have more stuff like that where we can get back to who we were and who we are as a culture, I think.
And I think that would also help with self-esteem and shame that some of our young people have when they don't know about culture and they don't know their links. And sometimes with the kids in care, they may not know what community they even come from, but even being involved, something like that, gives them some starting blocks.
That's right.
To understand.
And to have pride in who you are, and look, and for a lot of people don't know where they come from, but the journey, is part of the learning, and that going back and finding out who you are and where you come from and what that means, because it's not just a name, it's not just a group of people, it's a family, it's connection, it's belonging, and I think that's really, really important, and that's something that I think has been lost over the last so many years. That has been one of the casualties, and I think we need to look at stuff like that, and that's where I think taking kids out bush,
Yeah. Now, my final question is,
Yep.
what message or key messages do you want our viewers to walk away with from our yarn this afternoon?
I want them to, when they hear about Aboriginal people, to think with different minds and put yourself in our position. You know, hear with different ears, see with different eyes, and feel with different hearts. You know, I mean, imagine how you'd feel if it was your culture, your people that were treated the way that we were treated. How would you feel? You know, how there's one that because I talk about how my grandmother, my great grandmother, got an exemption certificate, and she was 82 years old. You know, and here she is, and she had to sign this derogatory form. You know, does she mix with other Aboriginal people? Does she drink alcohol? You know, all these derogatory questions. And here's an 82-year-old woman that is saying, please, can I be free? Can I leave this mission where you've kept me locked up all of these years? Of course she lied, because where's an 82-year-old woman who is illiterate because she couldn't read and write, that's worked all her life but never been paid and's got no money? Where else is she going to go? How would you feel if it was your 82-year-old mother being thrown out in the street? You know, put yourself in our position. How would you feel if your children, they came in and took your kids away? And that's still happening today without proper consultation with people. You know, how would you feel if they came in and took your kids because they just didn't understand? And we really had that even with my grandson, with my son. We had child protection standing over the top of him, you know, and he was saying to me, "Oh, you keep out of it, Mum," until it got too heavy. And then he said to him, "I'm calling my mum on you." And I said to him, they said, "Oh, we're going to bring the manager." I said, "Good, you bring the manager." And don't worry, they walked out that door and they well turned around and had it totally, they understood our side of it, which they wouldn't listen to my son before. But how sad for those people that don't have an advocate like my children have got. You know, and we need to have more advocates out there for our people that can understand and can speak the truth for them without them feeling intimidated. So, that's my big thing. Think about how you'd feel.
Yeah. I love that. I want to say thank you very much for joining me tonight.
My pleasure.
As I said, I have been cyber stalking you, and I know all about you, and I love all the work.
I've been watching you too. You've been travelling around a bit.
I do. And I'm still traveling around again. But look, hey guys, I want to say thank you, Sherry, for joining us, and I'll see you guys at the next podcast. Thanks heaps. Thanks, Sherry.
Thank you.